OIC infrastructure landscape, the size of OIC infrastructure gap, analysis of sector and regional gaps, key challenges and opportunities, the role Islamic finance can play, and some strategic considerations and policy recommendations. So there's a lot of meat to get through in this report, and as you take your seats, I'm sure you'll enjoy what we have ahead in store for you all. So just to set the context a bit, the OIC infrastructure landscape is a topic of key importance, as I mentioned, and OIC governments are now realizing this. As you can see from the display, several major OIC markets are prioritizing infrastructure development. They include the MENA countries, such as Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Morocco, and Egypt, as well as Southeast Asian powerhouses in Islamic finance and development, such as Malaysia and Indonesia, and also Turkey from Central Asia. So there is a lot of realization going on already as stakeholders that OIC infrastructure development needs to be addressed at a more deeper level as well. To that end, I'm pleased to report that the report finds that we have also, as OIC stakeholders, enabled and enacted support laws and policies to enable this development across the OIC region. If you look at the graph, there's a lot of laws listed out there. I'm not going to go through them one by one, of course, with you all, but just to share with you that in major markets in Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, and Turkey as well, there are laws in place already which show that there is a lot of development on this and the legal and policy regulatory frameworks for OIC infrastructure. Now, some of you might be wondering, what is the size of the gap for OIC infrastructure as a whole? I'm pleased to share with you that the report comes up with a credible estimate for that. The number is $2.7 trillion. $2.7 trillion. It's a huge number. It's a significant number. It just gives you some flavor on that, some global context. And of course, you can download the report and find out more about the figures and the breakdowns that I'll be going through today. But $2.7 trillion represents the figure of the OIC infrastructure gap across the region, across 7 different sectors: roads, telecoms, electricity, water, rail, ports, and airports. And that figure is, just to give some global context, it's 18% of the overall global figure of $15 trillion over the same period till 2040. So this is the period 2016 to 2040. What's the infrastructure gap projected to be? And it's $2.7 trillion for the OIC region specifically. And interestingly, the figure is large, but what's even more interesting is there's a high degree of concentration in the figure. In fact, 10 countries make up 62% of the overall gap. And I can share with you that at a more granular level, that the top 5 countries make up 44% of the gap overall. Those are Turkey, Egypt, Nigeria, Bangladesh, and Iran. Just those 5 countries make up 44% of the OIC overall gap as well. So what that shows is that not just is a high degree of concentration, but this is also to some extent understandable because these countries are demographically driven, high growth economies where infrastructure addresses the $2.7 trillion gap. Now, if we break down the gap in a more granular level, in terms of regions and sectors, we find that the OIC infrastructure gap at the regional level is strongest in MENA and Sub-Saharan Africa, strongest in terms of being the largest gap. In MENA, the gap is almost $1 trillion till 2040. Sub-Saharan Africa is also a significant gap, as well as Central Asia and South Asia. In terms of actual sectors which are large in terms of funding needs, they are roads, telecoms, electricity, and water. Roads is by far the largest sector. It's almost half the gap, if not more. And also telecoms, electricity, and water are above $300 billion threshold as well. So these are significant areas and gaps, and rail, ports, airports make up the rest of the gap at 10% collectively. So what does this all mean? Well, as stakeholders, we can actually pinpoint the gaps at the regional level and at the sector level and cross-correlate them and look at how we can address needs at each region's level. So in other words, if you can see from the analytical heat map, the red numbers represent what are the largest gaps, and the green numbers or the greenish numbers represent the smaller gaps. So from this intuitive heat map, you can see that overall in the OIC, some of the key funding gaps are in roads, telecoms, electricity, and water. And some of the gaps at the regional levels include at MENA, roads, water, rail, ports, and airports, whereas for Sub-Saharan Africa, there are large gaps in telecoms and electricity. Also in Central Asia and South Asia, electricity is a key concern and key gap to be filled, as well as roads and telecoms for those two regions. Now, of course, we know what the gap is now. We have some understanding of that. We have some understanding that the picture is not all rosy. There are some key challenges out there. I'm not going to go into too much detail because these are very high-level challenges, of course, that you can see on the screen. But please do download the report afterwards because we do go into a lot of depth and analysis on what these challenges are and pick them apart in further detail. So in terms of the challenges, capital and institutional factors take primary place, as well as different risks. Lack of funding is one, limited institutional capacity is another, vulnerability to political risks, weak legal and regulatory frameworks, and also environmental and social implications. So there is a lot of work still to be done for OIC stakeholders, and this report highlights some of them at a deeper analytical level as well. Some of the key opportunities that the report highlights as well are supporting economic growth and raising prosperity, increasing trade, enhancing social welfare, improving energy security and climate resilience, and further regional integration. So there are opportunities for us to plug that gap and to make that gap from 2.7 trillion down to something more manageable, but it will take a lot of work addressing the challenges that were previously mentioned. And if OIC stakeholders do that, it will be a great opportunity to seize because these benefits will be unlocked through addressing the OIC infrastructure gap. Another note, just as an aside, is that people always talk about innovation and the digital economy, but a lot of the building blocks for the innovation and digital economy sectors are based on fundamental building blocks like OIC infrastructure as well, like telecom, electricity as well. So without the hard infrastructure, so to speak, it's very difficult to also develop the soft infrastructure as well. Now, some of you here might be interested in Islamic finance and the role Islamic finance can play. And I'm pleased to share with you some of the key drivers from the report that we highlighted that show that the Islamic infrastructure finance sector is in good health and has a good outlook. Major OIC projects exist throughout the OIC region. As you can see from the left-hand side, some of the key drivers are there. And on the right-hand side, there are some examples of PPP projects in the OIC. So if I start with the left-hand side, you can see there's an ongoing need for OIC, at the OIC level, for Islamic infrastructure finance. There is a need for a structural shift. It's a structural shift going on, actually. And there are also different improvements in legal and regulatory infrastructure and rising investments through Islamic sustainable finance and impact investing. So there is a rosy picture out there potentially if we can grasp that opportunity to help Islamic infrastructure finance grow and address this gap. And as you can see from the different flags, it's not just one or two countries driving the OIC's PPP projects. It's many countries across many regions. You have MENA represented, you have Southeast Asia, Pakistan and Bangladesh also represent South Asia, and there are many projects there in those regions, in those countries, Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, and also Kazakhstan and Central Asia. So there is a lot of work being done on the ground, which is very useful and tangible work in the infrastructure space for Islam, that Islam finance can also play into. Finally, I'd like to wrap up with a few strategic considerations and some policy recommendations that the report highlights. Some of the strategic considerations are listed on the slide, and they include assessing country-level needs, planning soundly, and deploying resources effectively. They also include actively engaging stakeholders and complying with regulatory stipulations. And again, as we mentioned, the motto of this conference is partnerships to fend off crisis. And so that stakeholder engagement is a key piece of the puzzle to be addressed. That will help rather unlock further development in the OIC infrastructure markets. Finally, policy recommendations. Much work remains to be done. I don't think this is a big surprise for most people here, but there is a lot of positive work to build on as well. Capital, institutions, and stakeholder management will be key to plugging the gaps. And that includes creating a favorable investment climate, building institutional capacity, developing comprehensive plans, encouraging PPPs, and promoting effective stakeholder engagement. So what do we mean by all that? Well, in a nutshell, not just increasing the funding, but as some of the guests from the previous panel said as well, it also means increasing capacity and awareness around this issue, increasing the ability to build that institutional capacity to address and plan ahead for infrastructure projects, and also develop national plans. There are a few countries with national plans, on infrastructure, but there can always be more across 57 OIC nations. And finally, I'd just like to end with a note to say thank you very much for your time, and please download the report. It's available online already, and you can have a great look in detail at all the figures and facts that we mentioned and the key insights. It's a very detailed report, and I would thoroughly encourage you to look at it afterwards as well. Thank you for your time. Assalamu alaikum.